Hey everyone, welcome to another one of my incredibly consistent devlogs for Project Concordia. A couple months have passed since I last put one of these out, and I recently realized I've done so much I probably could have posted at least 2 of these in that time. The weird thing is that a lot of it comes down to refactoring and cleaning my existing implementations, or adding in functionality like, spoilers, sound, which is less of a sweeping structural change and more of an addition to a lot of existing code, but still takes a lot of work. So to try and cover everything in one devlog, instead of getting specific on every single addition, I figured I'd be better off giving you a tour of the latest build and describing additions as we encounter them. For anyone who's been keeping up with the devlogs, mention of a build is a pretty big deal. Until more recently than I'd like to admit, Project Concordia has been tested entirely within the Unity editor, and to absolutely no one's surprise but my own, it collapsed the moment it left the confines of the editor it used to call home. The first build came with a ton of issues, but most of these could be tracked down to one of 3 sources. Primarily, the game was struggling to build the entire map and initialize every entity within the map within a single frame of the scene being loaded. When I say it out loud, that one is kind of obvious. But this led to a lot of issues with pathfinding leading enemies through walls, enemies initializing incorrectly, and lighting phasing through obstacles. The second big issue came from my use of the plugin Shapes for World Space UI elements. This one was a little bit baffling. I'm still not sure where I went wrong or how it differs from Editor, but I managed to solve these issues in a quick and dirty way until I narrow it to the root cause. The last of the big obstacles was basically every input I'd assigned, never unassigned, leading to an absolute spam of null reference exceptions on basically any input. It was, frankly speaking, a huge mess, and one I could have avoided if I'd been a little bit more mindful when setting things up in the first place. But we're here now, and after a week, I managed to fix all the notably egregious bugs, so let's stop dragging it out and finally take a look at the build. Pretty impressive, right? It's a whole main menu. This might seem underwhelming to you, but I promise there's a lot of depth to this thing, so let's take it piece by piece. First of all, the visuals. I had a pretty distinct idea of what I wanted the main menu to reflect. One trope I absolutely love in sci-fi is needlessly archaic technology being used, most often ancient graphic text displays instead of modern monitors like we have today. You can even see a lot of the influence of this style coming from one of our style references from some 90s sci-fi and cyberpunk anime. Now, obviously, raster-scanned pixel-based displays still exist in the world, but a while ago I remember seeing a video about vector graphic displays as an alternative that never really quite caught on. So I decided to focus on that, with a little bit of post-processing thrown in to get some bloom, and we've got a pretty convincing representation of an in-universe graphics display. Context aside, it's definitely a bit underwhelming right now. Don't worry, we'll improve this in time. Next, we've got some immediate options we can look at on this menu. Some you'd expect, like play, which currently always loads the first level in the level list, which, that's a thing now. The game has a list of levels that do all work as you'd expect. We've also got options, which also work. These are incredibly bare bones right now, just some sound sliders and resolution settings. But these values are saved to a player save file, which is also a thing now. This tracks the game's settings and the player's progress. This is obviously super susceptible to game file manipulation as is, but I'll be investigating ways of subverting that later. We've also got a level select, which I'm particularly proud of. One of my bigger regrets from my last game, Dial-In, is that there is no visual aspect to the level select. You just need to remember what the level's number or name is to locate it. Project Concordia solves this with a proper stylized level preview, leaning into that vector graphic style. I just used the Shapes plugin to draw these, and the bloom took it the rest of the way. Clicking a level's name will display a box, which will eventually show the player's best time and score, and allows them to play the level, unless they've not unlocked it yet, in which case the level is locked. That's right, player progression is real. We'll come back to the last 2 options later. In the meantime, let's try playing the game. Even before we get in, we see another huge victory for those wanting the most basic of functionality out of their game. We've got a loading screen, which, as it turns out, is actually very necessary, because loading into the game scene for the first time isn't quick in the slightest. Now that we're finally in the game, things are starting to look a lot more like they did last devlog. But it's about time I swapped off the background audio and boost the game audio instead. Like I mentioned earlier, we've got sound now, which extends to various music tracks that play during the planning, combat, and cooldown phases. There isn't any way to change these sound settings in the game yet, but we do also have a pause function to return to the main menu whenever necessary. The planning phase remains the same, aside from a change in the route visualization. Rather than drawing a straight line from target to target, I've hooked into the pathfinding to draw a suggested path towards the next target from the player themselves. The Unity Asset Store is filled with a lot of powerful plugins, but making them fit to your needs can take a bit of wrestling sometimes, which getting this to work certainly did. The combat phase is where the sound additions become a bit more noticeable. Basically, every standard interaction in the game has some kind of sound now. This means shooting, melee, executions, entering and exiting slow-mo, and injuring enemies. Everything makes some kind of sound. The sounds themselves are cobbled together from various royalty-free sound sources, and some audio packs I've purchased in the past. But generally speaking, nothing is final at this point in development. A less obvious addition to the combat phase is that there is now a very work-in-progress dodge function. This is just something I've been thinking about for a while now, so I figured I'd add it, and if it doesn't work out, I can just remove it just as fast. The only issue is that it provides immunity frames that cause the player to bump into bullets, which obviously isn't something we want, so that's something I'll be looking at fixing as part of my eventual refinement pass. I do think that's enough of a demonstration of the gameplay itself for now. Maybe one day you'll be able to explore the remaining levels yourself when I randomly decide I'm happy enough to spit out a prototype onto itch for people to check out. Back on the main menu, we can take a look at the level editor. There's only a couple things to show here, and unfortunately I've made no changes to the general presentation of the editor, but it's more or less functionally complete considering what's possible in the game itself. That is to say, it has everything you could need to produce levels without ever using the Unity editor itself. The most basic file management is also now possible, with the save and load working as you'd expect, allowing you to navigate your previously created levels or just any level files you've placed in the respective folder. You can now also change what music plays during the level, which you can see I've got 4 vaguely thematic tracks to choose from that I pulled from that music pack I mentioned earlier. There's no way to preview these sounds yet, but that's something I'd like to add later on. There is also a functioning new button, which pretty simply clears the entire level, as well as a play button, which lets you test out a level straight from the editor. Obviously, a level can't function without any enemies, so let's quickly throw together a level. In our enemy tab, you can notice we have a couple new icons in the enemy list. These are a couple very basic enemy variants I've added with the hope of introducing some complexity to the game through variety, forcing the player to take different approaches based on enemies present rather than steamrolling through everything without any concerns. I've only added 3 alternative types of enemies for now, although more might appear in the future depending on feedback from playtesting. So far, we have a quick speed-based enemy that's intended to rush down the player with melee weapons. They can technically carry ranged weapons, but my intention is to limit them to melee range, otherwise the player will have far too little time to react to their attacks. The second enemy is a tankier enemy. This type technically implements 2 restrictions. For starters, they have more health, requiring 2 hits to kill, but to avoid any weird scenarios where they get knocked down and executed, bypassing their additional health, they're also immune to melee weapons and knockdown, essentially making them susceptible to ranged attacks alone. This might get changed in the future though to let them get knocked down when on 1 health. The final enemy type is an armored enemy, which sounds a lot like the tankier enemy, but instead of requiring a ranged attack to defeat, these guys wear, let's say, bulletproof armor for now, and need to be struck with a thrown weapon or a melee hit to defeat. I think these guys are going to be particularly important for managing the pacing of levels as they essentially force the player to abandon any ranged weapons they have on hand at the moment, which could put them in a tricky spot if they aren't careful. Last thing to show is that any custom levels are now completely playable through the custom level select on the main menu, including the little preview of the map. I really like the idea of putting the same set of tools I use in the game to see what other people come up with. So a lot of cleanup is still needed before the level editor is complete, especially when it comes to file navigation. But I haven't really approached making a tool like this before, so it's important to me to see it through. And with that, that's pretty much everything I've got done. It's been a while since my last devlog, so I apologize for the delay, but as it is right now, I basically go for bursts of development and then remember I should be making these after several months have passed. That being said, it's the holidays, and I think I've earned myself a little break, and I'll be taking the opportunity to start tinkering around in Godot to see if I can create some fun stuff there. As always, if you made it to the end of the video, I'd really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. It goes a long way towards putting this video in other people's recommendations. Expect to hear from me in the new year with some progress on Project Concordia and perhaps some other smaller projects. We'll see how it goes.